slow today. How is that different than any other day? We're going to be in 1 Kings. We'll start up in chapter 16. And what I will let everybody know about, I've had two different preachers in the last few days contact me. There is a man working Churches of Christ for money, and so far he has collected tens of thousands of dollars just to get him and his wife and daughter back to California. Shows his California driver's license, and apparently talks a good line about being a member of the church. And it's just a scam. It happens. But this particular one apparently has been working the East Coast heavily and has really taken a number of congregations. And so they're beginning to pass out wanted posters to warn them if you see him come. And I'll put it on. I'll post it in the foyer there. But just a reminder, usually he likes to hit congregations on a Wednesday night when there's fewer people there, and he can fast talk them. Now, over the years, I've had a lot of fast talking. Preachers learn real quick, and Charles and I talking earlier said, you know, when somebody comes in and explains to me, yes, I'm a member of the church, I grew up in the church, I've been a member of the church all my life, and I go to church somewhere, and oh, well, where do you go? Well, I forget the name of it, but it's in some place, you know, usually far away. Oh, okay. And I said, well, you know, what is it you need? And they say, oh, well, Reverend, here's what I need. And okay, now I know that you're lying about everything. One of those things, there are a lot of things that people can say, and we all know this from life anyway, that just aren't necessarily true. And you catch them and you learn some things. By the way, that raises an interesting question. Do you suppose that God will hold us responsible for any time that we were ever fooled and helped somebody that really didn't need help?
I have heard a lady say one time, she says, I give to the needy as well as the greedy, and I let God separate which one's which.
Exactly. Kind of interesting. You do recall that on one occasion 10 lepers came to Jesus. How many of them did he heal? All 10. I wonder. They were told to follow the law and go to present themselves to the priest at the temple there and make the appropriate sacrifice. But only one of them apparently did what he was told. And you always wonder, what happened to the other 9? We don't know. Did their leprosy come back on them? Would God do such a thing? You might want to read your Bible a little better. I remember a king of Israel that assured the Lord that he loved the Lord and he was a prophet of God, and he was. And then he turned away from the Lord. And the Lord said, well, I've already said you and your sons forever after will be kings, so you're going to be king. And so that's how Saul and Jonathan later became the second king of Israel. That's not right, is it? God can withdraw blessings if it turns out that you show him you've made a mistake and don't want to follow him. That's your choice. That's our choice. And it's interesting because that ties in very well with our lesson. Ahab and Jezebel. Could they have chosen to do right? Did Ahab know anything about the right thing to do? Absolutely. In fact, one of his protests, we'll get into before we finish today, one of his protests is, I don't like these prophets that are from God because they keep telling me things I don't want to hear. So why don't you listen to what you don't want to hear and do the right thing, and then you won't have a problem. Pick up 1 Kings 16, just a reminder. Verse 25, Ahab's father, Omri, how bad of a king was he? Worst king that had ever ruled in Israel. And then his son took the throne. How did Ahab do?
Even worse.
Even worse than his father. This is not a competition to see who can be the worst. This ought to be a competition to see who can do the best. We looked a little bit at Jezebel. Where does she come from? Where's Jezebel come from? Where? Phoenicia. Tyre and Sidon, the two big cities of Phoenicia. And again, there had been quite a connection to the real God in Phoenicia for a time. It was the king of Tyre and Sidon, of the Phoenician king, that would supply the wood to the temple and help Solomon with masons and craftsmen that knew what they were doing in building the temple. And yet all that's gone. They've forgotten all of that now. A couple of 100 years and they don't remember anything about God, and they're worshiping idols. And Jezebel, as queen, there's probably a good reminder. If you get one spouse in marriage, one or the other, that's not what they should be, is there a problem there? Always dangerous. Got to tell you one of those preacher stories. Many years ago, I won't tell you how many, but many years ago, a man in the congregation that we worshiped at, I worshiped at with my parents, actually. This man was a Christian. His wife was not. He raised their children very faithfully, bringing them to church, teaching them the Bible, and they became Christians. And after they became Christians, he left the church, became the one to quit and stay home. And oddly enough, just about the same time, his wife became a Christian, became faithful apparently for the rest of her life. Wow. You know, one of the things that a lot of times teaching teenagers lessons, one of the great illustrations, you have one of the teens stand up on a table and someone stand down below. Grab hands. Which is easier, to pull someone off the table or to pull the other person up to the table? Pretty simple illustration, isn't it? It's always easier to pull someone down. And if there's anything that the Bible teaches us about sin, it's always easier to get pulled down. Do the hard thing. Do the hard thing. Jezebel seeks to stamp out every remnant of worship of the real God. She kills prophets. She sends notices out. And who's the big prophet, the well-known prophet that stands openly against her? Elijah. There are other prophets. Obadiah will hide prophets in the caves. But he's doing it secretly. One man stands up against her, openly, defiant. And how well does that work out for Elijah? You know how it is. If you're faithful to God, it's really, everything's easy and there are no problems in your life whatsoever, right? I'm not sure why we imagine that it will be that way. Well, everybody in the Bible had no problems. I mean, Elijah knew that God was going to take him to heaven and he wouldn't even have to die. No problems, nothing to worry about in life. Did Elijah know that there were no problems and none of those threats by Jezebel to kill him before the sundown came? Did Elijah actually know that none of those big talks by evil people would come true? No.
He was on the run all the time.
He was on the run. He's constantly fleeing. It seems like if you go back and read there in 1 Kings his life, all he does is he comes in, sees the king and queen, and says, you guys are doing wrong. God's going to punish you. And now I've got to run for my life. And he disappears repeatedly. Sometimes that's what our lives are like in this world today. It's not easy doing the right thing. Ahab enhances his palace at Samaria. It becomes, 1 Kings 22:39, an ivory house. Okay, where are they going to get ivory from? Most of it's going to come from elephants, big pieces of ivory. If you're going to cover the walls and make it look really fancy. And where do you find elephants with big ivory tusks? Anywhere around Israel? India elephants are smaller tusks. They have to be transported a lot further. Closer ones are in Central Africa. And that's not easy. Getting all that ivory. Can you imagine being the one assigned to go out and kill that elephant? With your spear? With your bow and arrow? Just remember, they're out killing hundreds, perhaps thousands of elephants for their ivory. And they're not doing it with the latest rifle. It's hard work. It's expensive material for them to acquire. He builds a second palace in Jezreel. If you look on the map, Samaria is up in the mountains there, kind of like Jerusalem is. Jezreel, 25 miles to the north, is lower level. What difference does that make? Anybody ever tried going to the mountains? Some really big, go to the Rocky Mountains in the middle of winter. Mark's wanting to do a tour on his motorbike. Be sure and do that in January, February. And be sure to cross, the Rockies, the highest points there. Why not? It's cold. It's snowy. And the reason for Jezreel and the palace there is simply because the winters are warmer down at lower elevation. He likes the climate better. And it's there in Jezreel that he sees a really nice vineyard. How do you get a really nice vineyard?
Work at it.
Yeah, it takes a lot of work. You may just rap me on the head with that thing. That's what it's like when you have to keep your daughter-in-law from yelling at you. But you imagine the work and care that it takes. I don't know, anybody ever try to raise grapes? Plant a couple of grapevines? Okay, so you get enough grapes to feed all the neighborhood in the first year or two? How long do those grapevines take?
5 years.
Something over 5 years to really mature and begin heavily producing. And guess what you have to do? We got to do this with kiwi fruit in New Zealand. One of our elders had a pretty massive amount of kiwi fruit, and it was all hands on deck. By the way, where I grew up in my earliest years in New Mexico, do you realize that the first day of deer hunting season is a school holiday? Everybody was allowed off, That's back when we carried a rifle in the back. When I went to high school, I had a rifle in the back of my pickup hanging in the window. And you know what the principal said about it? He said, "Hey, come over here and look at mine. I'll show you. I see what you got. Look at mine." And we'd compare rifles right there in the school parking lot. Boy, that world is gone, isn't it? Nothing happens quite like that anymore. But in with vines, when it comes time to gather the fruit, how much do you gather? We pick on Johnny, for this one. He down at the farm, when John Boy has all the corn ready, how much of that do you go through and pick? When the hay's ready, you just go through and pick enough for one bale and set it aside and wait a couple of weeks and get another bale. Yes, we like to walk through the cornfield and pick out the best ears, but you know how you're going to do that if that's a commercial job and you want to sell that, you got to pick the whole thing. If you're doing it for feed, it's got to all be picked. And do you suppose in the land of Israel, several hundred years, centuries before the time of Christ, do you suppose they had any automatic grape pickers? People. It takes people, manpower to do it. And then who has to go through and carefully prune? All right, pick on Betty time a while. You remember how to prune those grapevines?
No, that's probably why they're not producing.
You got to cut them back at exactly the right spot. If you go just lopping the things off somewhere, you get nothing. I've told you before, we had an apple tree in California years ago. Everybody said, that's a beautiful apple tree. There was not a single solitary apple on it. It had been there for years before we moved into the house. There was nothing growing on that tree. And I was about ready to start calling people liars. That's not an apple tree. There's no apples there. It's never even looked like it was going to. And a friend of mine who had worked in an apple orchard years ago came over and says, let me show you how to prune this. And he pruned it. And you know what we had the next year? Apples. It's like magic. So here's a man, you understand where the king is coming from. Naboth has a family vineyard that has been going for probably 200-300 years. Those are some good grapevines. They're not the little stalks that we see in somebody. Those things are like small trees. And they grow out and they're majestic and valuable. And you see what Ahab, that's a really nice grapevine. It's a wonderful vineyard. I want it. Now what does Naboth tell him? Why not?
It's his family, it's his inheritance.
Okay. When Joshua brought the people into the land, they were settled by tribes in different areas, and Naboth, this is his inheritance from the time of Joshua, centuries earlier. And this belongs to him and his family, is to pass down to his. You remember the story of Ruth? What was the problem with Naomi's inheritance? It was lost unless they had someone to pass it on to. Naboth says, nope, I am not going to sell you that. So what does Ahab do?
He acts like the spoiled child. He goes home and he's out, and she wants to know what's wrong with him. Like, I guess most wives do when your husband.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, what's wrong with you?
Why are you moping around the house? Sulking. Look at the picture that God is painting. This guy is hilarious. I mean, he's evil, but the attitude of sometimes, is the attitude of the wicked ever really anything good? Be careful what you brag about. Be careful about what impresses you. If you're impressed by the world, everything's good for them, not really. The psalmist will talk about that several times. David will talk about it. He struggled with it. And we don't appreciate David's struggle in some of those Psalms. Oh, the wicked are getting away with everything, and I'm miserable, and nothing's going right for me. How did David lived in a palace? He didn't know anything about a hard life, right? Do you remember David, once he becomes anointed as king by Samuel? What happens? Does he live in a palace?
Now he has to run for his life.
He's on the run for his life for decades, with the king constantly trying to kill him. On at least a couple of occasions, his best friend saves him from being executed by his best friend's father. Who was his best friend? What was his name? Jonathan. Jonathan saves David's life, protects him. By the way, there's a really great story, another one, good one to read if you haven't read it lately. Does Jonathan know who David is? He knows he's going to be the next king. He knows God's promises and prophecies that David will sit on the throne, not Jonathan. What kind of an attitude does he have toward David? He loves it. David would later comment in the Psalms, there is a friend that's closer than a brother. Sometimes there are really, really close friends. And that was Jonathan. That's an incredible story. That's not Ahab. Let's get back to Ahab. He's having a good time. He's home pouting and sulking and crying. So what does Jezebel suggest? Grow up, plant you a vineyard, and in 20 years you'll have something nearly as good as Naboth's.
In my words, she said, man up and go take it.
Basically, she says, man up and go steal it. Okay, you know what a real man would do. Gives you a hint about Jezebel's character, doesn't it? Ahab says, no, I serve the real God, and I'm not going to do it. Stealing is against God's law. I won't do that. Nope. Ahab says, what a wonderful idea. Help me. And they end up having Naboth stoned to death. Bring in false witnesses and say, oh, he's against the king, he's doing all these things wrong. And how do you get a false witness? They pay him money to testify at the trial. And they stone Naboth to death. And now there's nobody that owns the land. So Ahab can have it. Elijah is another one of the times when Elijah comes to Ahab. And very specifically, Elijah tells Ahab and Jezebel how they're going to die. It's funny, we get some terminology about somebody dying like a dog in our language. It seems to come from some biblical events, because the dogs are very highly connected to the death of both Ahab and Jezebel. 1 Kings 21, verse 25. Prophet makes an interesting comment. 1 Kings 21, 25. Surely there was no one like Ahab that sold himself to do evil in the sight of the Lord, because Jezebel, his wife, incited him. You know, I don't think that because my wife made me do it is going to be a good excuse. Some of y'all are old enough to remember a comedian on TV. His favorite line was, "The devil made me do it." You're old. I didn't remember his name. I wasn't that old. heard somebody laughing back there behind you, Charles. I have no idea who it was.
Echo.
Echo. Does the devil make you do anything? Does your husband or wife make you do anything, especially something that's wrong? In fact, if they want you to do something, what do? What's the word that we use for some, if your wife, just picking on everybody here this morning, huh? If Eddie's wife wants him to take her to dinner at a particular place, what does she do? Does she twist his arm up behind his back? Yeah, she gives him the pretty please, flutters those eyelashes at him, and cuddles up to him and says, please, please. And does it work? Always. Always. You realize that's the word that's being used here. In a negative sense, Jezebel is inciting him. She's just encouraging him. If it were something positive, we'd have said she encouraged him. But when you encourage people to do the wrong thing, you kind of need to put a different spin on that word, don't you? And we realize that understanding the difference between right and wrong, it makes a huge difference. Years later, this is a little later in 1 Kings 22, we'll pick up in just a minute with verse 37. Ahab and Jehoshaphat. Who's Jehoshaphat? No, he's not the guy that needs to go on a diet. He's the king of the southern kingdom, Judah. Ahab and Jehoshaphat are uniting now for a battle. Ahab's yes men, his prophets, come and say, the Lord is with them. Jehoshaphat, being from Judah, says, no, we're not going to listen to that guy. I want a real prophet. And the real prophet that gets brought in, you have to wonder, is that the only one that Ahab can find? There's a guy that he knows, Micaiah. And what does Micaiah say? Yeah, it's a good battle because Ahab's going to die. And Ahab, how does he take that? He says, I'll tell you what, I'm going to throw the prophet into prison. And apparently, Ahab actually believed. 1 Kings 22 is a good chapter, another one of those good chapters to read the whole thing and get the picture there. Ahab actually doesn't believe his yes men prophets that say, yeah, it's no problem, no worries, go to battle and win. He's worried about this prophet, and like he's worried about Elijah's prophecies, that you're going to die. So what does he do in the battle? This is a great one. I mean, people think that the Bible doesn't have anything that new, People go to war, and if you're afraid of getting killed, what do? You hide. You dress up like the other side. Ahab disguises himself as a common soldier. I look like everybody else. Don't worry about me. I'm not the king. So nobody's going to target me. A bowman, 1 Kings 22 describes it, shoots at random. This guy just launches an arrow at the incoming enemy in order to get somebody. And guess who he hits? Ahab. And Ahab's wound leads to his death. 1 Kings 22, pick up verse 37 there. So the king died, and he was brought back to his capital city, Samaria. And they buried the king in Samaria. And they washed the chariot that he was riding in by the pool of Samaria. And the dogs licked up his blood. And the writer adds a little more insult to injury there. Now the harlots used to bathe themselves in that pool. Well, this is going downhill rapidly, isn't it? And all this happened according to the word of the Lord, which God spoke. God says something. Does it matter what God says? You know, as parents, we pretty much use that line. I told you. And it's hilarious, you know, to me, going to a grocery store somewhere and a little 3-4-year-old is running around and mom says, "Stop that." When you as a parent tell a little child to stop that, does that mean anything? You pick them up, you turn them around and set them down and tell them what I tell you is what matters. Anybody here but me ever actually physically pick up their child and tell them you're going to do what you're told? Y'all are weird people. You must be mean parents. Does God ever physically pick us up and say, look, you're going to do what you're told? And sometimes, some of y'all are old enough to remember that when your parents did it to you, sometimes it wasn't going to be a fun time, was it? Ahab reaches the point where God simply says, I've had enough of you. And I'm not going to put up with this anymore. And Ahab, just like a little kid, you know, I'll do as I please. God says, no, you won't. And he not only causes him to die, but in an embarrassing way. If a king is leading his troops and is killed in battle out there, there's a lot of talk about his great valor. When he hides himself as a common soldier and accidentally gets killed anyway, that's embarrassing. Jezebel lives on for nearly 14 years. Until one day a fellow by the name of Jehu, the captain of Israel's army. Think about that. Israel's the north. This is where Ahab and Jezebel are. It's Jehu, the senior general of the army. And he's had enough. And he executes the queen. Do you remember how he does it? It follows exactly the prophecy from Elijah. She's thrown from the window, not from the ground floor, but from the upper window to her death. And by the way, God mentions too, guess what happens to her blood? The dogs lick it up again. Talk about somebody that's gone to the dogs. That's Ahab and Jezebel. Literally. In the most horrible way possible. And yet, if you keep on reading past this point, you find there in 1 Kings, the evil influence from their lives lives on. But you see why God makes the comment as their lives begin as king and queen. As God introduces King Ahab, there was never anybody worse than him. And God had just said that about his father. Now he says, here's his son is even worse than his father was, and his father was the worst one that ever lived. Because he was acting just like all the others before him. Pretty embarrassing situation. Pretty embarrassing situation. Obvious question, does any of that, carry a lesson for us? Yeah, watch out for the guy named Elijah. Don't mess with him. But then what was Elijah doing? Simply telling them what God said. I wonder if it's better to listen to God than to your husband or your wife or your preacher or your friend or anyone else.
I think of what Paul said, am I your enemy because I tell you the truth? And that's the way many people respond.
We don't like to hear what God says very well, do we? That's just normal human nature. I mean, can you think of anybody throughout history that didn't have that same problem? I can only think of two people that are specifically named as just being the epitome of, first one, the term is he walked with God. And back there in Genesis it says, and he was not. He simply ceased to exist on this earth because God took him. What was his name? The man that walked with God.
Yeah.
Who?
Yeah.
Walking with God. That's just an incredible thought, isn't it? And can you imagine what life was like in Enoch's day? Who's his son? This was one of my dad's favorite Bible riddles. The oldest man that ever lived died before his father did. Now name those two men. Wait, that can't be possible, can it? Methuselah, the oldest man that ever lived, if I remember right, 969 years of age. He dies the year of the flood. He dies in the year of the flood. But he died before his father did. Why? Because Enoch never died. What kind of a man was he? And what was the world like of Enoch and Methuselah? What were other people like that were not serving God? The majority of people, everybody but basically their family. Remember what's said about the days of Noah? Every man did what was right in his own sight. And every thought was continually evil. That's not a compliment, is it? I guess that's why I never cared for a famous song. Getting to the end of my life and sing, I did it my way. I'm sure that will be the #1 song in hell. But if you want to spend eternity in heaven, then it needs to be I did it God's way. Comments, thoughts? I guess we need an assignment for next week, don't we? Something else.
Not if I can put it on comments and thoughts. The thing that impresses me daily almost with Ahab and Jezebel is the negative influence she had on what could have been, should have been his walk with God.
There's another prophet. I'll leave this one for you to look up. We're about out of time, and I got to leave you an assignment too. But there's another prophet later on that actually makes the comment, or God makes the comment to him. He says, hey, if this person, basically, God says, if this person goes to hell, does wrong and goes to hell, and you don't tell them what they're doing wrong and try to stop them, whose fault is it? Okay, it's always their fault. That's the choice they made. That's what they did. But it's also your fault for not telling. Now, if you tell them, and God explains this in great detail, he said, now, if you tell them and they do right, you've won a soul. You've accomplished the salvation of two people, you and them. What happens if you've told them and they don't listen? It's their problem. They answer for it, but you still saved your soul. God expects us to speak up. And of course, we've talked about this one before. We can speak up in a rude way. Just walk down the street telling everybody you see, you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to hell. See me for details. How many souls are you going to win that way? Probably not any.
It did work for John.
Yes, but it was God telling him that way. So I'm not sure we want to spend 3 days in the belly of a whale just to learn that lesson, do we? Okay, assignment for next week. Ananias and Sapphira. We'll look at some more wonderful people. Another wonderful couple. Acts chapter 4 and 5. You'll find some details about them in Acts 4 and 5. So, and the lead in to that story. Thank y'all.